Let's kick it off. Shasta, you want to get us started, please?
Of course. Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. We're excited to have you with us for our third TribalP2Action webinar, and we have some great speakers for us today to talk more about pollution prevention and saving money and preventing pollution from a water and wastewater standpoint. So, of course, we all use water, so this is important for all of us. I know certainly this has been an issue for us at Pala, so I'll be sharing some of our experiences as we go along. But we're glad you're here, and I'm going to let Josh fill in some of the gaps.
Great, thank you, Shasta. So Shasta just introduced herself. We'll kind of run through introductions, and I'll give a bit of an overview and kind of get us started, and then I'll turn it over to our expert panelists from Wood Environmental. Jessica, I believe you're on. You want to briefly introduce yourself?
Scott?
Yes, hi, sorry. Good morning, everyone. This is Jessica. Sorry about that.
Did you call Jessica? We didn't hear you. We can hear you now. We heard Jessica, and then it looked like you fell over.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hi, this is Jessica Counts-Arnold, having a rough morning, but I'm a pollution prevention coordinator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Region 9, and I'm also the project officer for the grant that this project is completing, and I'm excited that tribes are learning more about P2, and I'm hoping that that we can continue the great work. Paula's been a great partner, and I'm looking forward to the presentations today. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, so the next person that's part of our P2 team is John Flores of the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians. John was unable to join us today. He's doing a lot of great work in P2 and other areas with us, and they're one of the participating tribes and businesses part of this project. I'm Josh Simmons with Prosper Sustainably. Prosper Sustainably is the lead consulting team on this project, and overseeing the kind of development implementation underneath Pala, and being supported by both Michael Burr from Microgrid Institute and Wood. So Michael.
Good morning. Yes, I'm glad to be here. My name is Michael Burr. I'm the director of Microgrid Institute and a principal consultant for Burr Energy LLC. We do mostly energy consulting, mostly around microgrids, as might not be a surprise. And we've been working with Prosper Sustainably and a number of tribes, including the Pala and San Pasqual bands, on renewable energy and microgrid projects for a few years. So you'll hear a little more from me next week, but today I'm really glad to be here and learning more about water pollution prevention.
Great, thank you, Michael. And we'll have our experts from Wood introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. My name is Dan Perrin. I've been with Wood about 8 years. I've been working in environmental business for over 30 years, doing pollution prevention planning for mostly military installations since the mid-90s. Basically, I'm a chemi background, environmental masters, and just very interested in the sustainability and trying to infuse that kind of philosophy within our clients.
My name is Scott Brown. I'm an environmental scientist with Wood. I've also been with Wood for about 8 years. My expertise is more in hazardous materials and hazardous waste management, but I have a background in sustainability and also in stormwater pollution prevention and in groundwater as well.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Scott. All right, so here's a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. And, we don't have time to do introductions to everybody participating, but hoping to run a quick poll right now just to get a sense of who you're participating in terms of what roles you're in. And I also encourage you to introduce yourself via the chat menu too. Your name, where you're from, what your role is. But let me run that quick poll right now. Shasta, if you want to get the screaming goat ready. So Shasta always supports us with the polls, her and her screaming goat, just to get your attention. only have three of them today, so.
Oh, darn.
Right.
All right, screaming goat, everybody. Here he is.
Thank you, Shasta. Thank you, Screaming Goat. Take a moment to complete the poll. We'll leave it up here for just about a minute or so.
And also, if you are wanting to interact with us during the course of the webinar, please go ahead and use that chat function to send messages to us or to talk amongst yourselves. I always like to know where people are coming from. So when you're done with the poll, if you want to take a moment just to say where you are in the country and perhaps which tribe or organization you represent, that would really be great.
Awesome. Thank you, Shasta. All right, we've had the majority of people respond. So it looks like mostly government agency support, followed by tribal government staff. I'll share the results with others. So then I'm going to provide an overview of the TribalP2Action project. And then after I give that overview, we're going to hand it over to Scott and Dan, who are going to get into the details of P2 planning in the context of water and wastewater, weaving in strategies and examples from their experiences and from their work with both San Pasqual and Pala. And Shasta is going to share a bit of her experience throughout as well. They're going to end by concluding with the overall kind of overarching challenges and lessons learned in this area. And then we're going to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. I encourage you to be asking questions throughout. And if we see some along the way that seem to be particularly relevant to the slide or topic, we can stop and address that question in the meantime. All right. So this webinar is part of an 8-part series, 5 webinars and 3 roundtables. So webinar number 3, we've already done the first 2 webinars and the first roundtable. We have our second roundtable discussion coming up on Thursday, where we're going to focus on landscaping strategies for saving water and money at tribal businesses or any other business or organization. And then next week, we're going to shift over to energy. General P2 planning focusing on energy is going to be the webinar topic, and then the roundtable is going to focus on energy storage. And then the final webinar is going to be the following week on Tuesday, where we will discuss P2 training and implementation. Just to step back, we've covered this slide each time, and just want to remind you what pollution prevention is, because it's not a very commonly accepted term in the field, but it's pursuant to the Pollution Prevention Act that was adopted and is being administered and implemented by the EPA. P2 is any practice that reduces, eliminates, or prevents pollution at its source. And in the environmental protection hierarchy, pollution prevention is usually what you want to do first before you proceed to reuse, recycling, treatment, or disposal. You can visit the EPA pollution prevention website using the link below. There's lots of resources on there, including grant funding opportunities, which is part of what funded this project, as well as technical assistance and a variety of resources. Since the topic today is water, I wanted to also direct you to EPA's Water Sense program, and I'll pull up that website and give Jessica a moment to share a little more information about Water Sense. Jessica?
Thanks, Josh. Yes, this EPA, the Water Sense program, it's a voluntary partnership program by EPA. It's both a label for water efficient products and also a resource for helping you to save water. So when you see this Water Sense logo right there, and underneath it says search products, this gives you an opportunity to find products that best meet your needs. This website also is very comprehensive. It has a ton of resources available to you, and also webinars that you can that are recorded that you can go and look at the various topics. So Josh, if you could scroll down, and so the area that I would say would be particularly useful is the commercial buildings one, and that's where you can also find the webinars and other tools and best practices. And I think that's it for WaterSense, and I apologize for the background noise.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I know I have people doing landscaping outside of my window as well. Yeah, so I definitely encourage you to go to this website to find WaterSense products that have achieved that certification, and then also rebates as well that you may find associated with these products and other measures you may implement. The TribalP2Action project is, as I mentioned, it's an EPA grant-funded project. Grant was received by the Pala and Mission Indians who are administering the program. It is a collaboration between Pala and the San Pasqual tribes, as well as the EPA, Prosper Sustainably, Microgrid Institute, Wood. We are also been collaborating with the California Green Business Network for green business certifications, among others. And speaking of the Green Business Network, there'll be a presentation by them at the very last webinar as well, including regarding a funding opportunity for tribes in California to pursue green business certification. So the project has kind of two major phases to it. There is one that focuses on P2 assessments and planning at Pala and San Pasqual. There are a series of Pala businesses, including the casino, spa and resorts, several agribusinesses, groves, vineyard, and I guess that's it. Fox Raceway, it's an off-road vehicle park, RV resort, gas station, mini mart, transfer station, fleet departments, wastewater treatment plants, as well as San Pasqual's Woods Valley Golf Club. So all of these businesses are under the microscope, I guess, and getting P2 assessment planning that are occurring for them to identify opportunities for them to reduce pollution and save money. I do want to add that, pollution prevention is about going above and beyond. This isn't really a regulatory thing. We are seeking to identify ways that go beyond what any business is required to do. There is also local employee training and green team type activities associated with these businesses at these tribes. And this webinar series and roundtable series is part of the National Tribal P2 Training Capacity Building Program, which you can find more information about at TribalP2Action.org. The first webinar has already been posted along with the slides. The webinar number 2 in this webinar will be posted this week, along with the slides from the roundtable discussion that occurred last week, focused on COVID and using hazardous substances and sanitation. And just so you can orient yourselves, both Pala and San Pasqual are located in northern San Diego County in California. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Dan to dive in, and I will chime in here and there with a poll and to add any context.
Thanks, Josh. So to start off with, we kind of want to talk about what when a tribe or any organization starts off on this endeavor, what are the goals to accomplish? So look at decreasing water demand, decreased water use and waste, decreasing water pollution. So that'd be more of like an effluent stormwater thing. Of course, if you reduce how much water you're using, how much water you're purchasing, hopefully realize cost savings with that. And then I think what would also be important to tribal organizations particularly would be achieving some level of self-sustainment. It seems that tribes, prefer to not have to rely on outside municipalities or suppliers for their resources. It's preferable that they have their own resources to draw from. That's not always possible, but that would also be a goal, is to move towards some sort of self-sustainment. Josh, do you want to do the poll, introduce the poll, or?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, as I mentioned, we have 3 polls today, and just trying to get a sense of what your challenges are and then your areas of interest. So in this case, we are doing a poll on your biggest P2 water challenge. So Shasta and Screaming Goat, please, to get everybody's attention.
Get that? I don't know where the
Nope.
microphone is on my computer, so I just have to keep trying.
I think right there. I think the underside of your monitor.
That was like right in the middle of my monitor.
Okay, that was good. That last one.
Now, see, as a panelist, I'm not allowed to answer this, but I'm looking at this and I'm like, why didn't we put in all of the above?
Well, biggest challenge, but yeah.
Yeah, like I said.
Right. Well, I figured if I gave multiple choices, everybody's going to put all the above.
If I wanted to be cheeky about it, I'd say staff resistance, but that's really not true. I'm very lucky I have a terrific water manager.
Yeah, as of right now, it's looking like lack of time or staffing is in the lead, with insufficient leadership or management support as a close second. And I added from the last webinar, lack of data, just because I feel like sometimes it's challenging to get water data. Okay, we have the majority of people responded. I'll share the results and then hand it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Josh. So if you were on any of the previous webinars, this is a leftover from that, but we wanted to go through just basically what the general P2 assessment steps are. So we're not going to get too into depth on this because we're going to go into depth later as it pertains to water. But the first step is select your target businesses, what you want to be included. The next step is establish the planning team, determine what goals and objectives and measurement metrics that you have to measure your progress, gather data, then identify potential opportunities, select those which opportunities you want to further analyze for potential implementation, then do additional analysis to determine implementation strategies for those opportunities, and then present those findings to the stakeholders. You want to document everything in some sort of a report or some sort of documentation, and then develop the P2 action plan. So the goal go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I'm just going to chime in. You know, the P2 assessment steps are, you know, basically it's just a logical, series of events to, identify priorities and what do we want to handle. I guess the challenge I see, with P2 in general is, hey, we need a lot of input from a lot of different people, and frankly, we're getting into other people's business typically. So I think, that's where, it's all I think everybody shares the goals and everything like that, but typically on any kind of a P2 project, but a lot of gathering data is tough sometimes, and we find a lot of resistance to P2 ideas and opportunities because it's somebody else's business basically in that regard. It's how they deal with things day to day. So just keep that in mind, that it's there are landmines out there as you go forward with P2. Definitely.
And so the objective for today is going to be, we've already covered these steps as it pertains to hazardous substances. And so we're going to kind of explore how water and water conservation fits into these steps.
Yeah, and I encourage you to go back to webinar number 1, where we cover these steps generally. And keep in mind too that they're not, they're sequential to a certain degree, but there's a lot of going back and forth between them. You may select your target business and your team members and start to do your scoping. And as you gather information and data, you may find that you need to go back and rescope, get different team member, or add some team members. This is just kind of general logical kind of guidance for how to proceed with this type of process.
Thanks, Josh. So the first step is planning for the P2 assessment, and the first step is, who are you going to include? So, for example, in this in this project,
Scott, you're frozen right now.
Frozen, yeah. Oh, shoot.
Scott, if you can hear us, you may want to call in instead. Particularly if you're it's frozen. It's always
Yeah, we can't.
It's always
hear you,
fun
Scott.
to see how somebody's face gets frozen on the video. Yeah, and either I can kind of continue until Scott gets back on, or if you want to, kind of continue with Scott is.
I'll go ahead and pick it up. But basically, yeah, who are our stakeholders? Who are the people going to be impacted by, any P2 efforts? Who are the people who are going to have the data? Who are going to have the decision-making, authority at the end of the day to proceed with any kind of initiative that's been identified? So, here we have listed out tribal administrators, budget officers for cost, environmental management folks, facility managers who work, again, they work with the operations day to day, and facility technical experts. So yeah, we want input from everybody, and a lot of times we found in our experience that the folks working day to day they'll come up with the P2 ideas for you. They're aware of it. They just haven't synthesized it in some terms of pollution prevention, but they know of more efficient ways to do things when they see them. So definitely include everybody up and down the line.
And at the Woods Valley Golf Club, we're working directly with John Flores, the environmental director there, who has an interest in supporting the tribe and all of its government agencies and businesses in this particular area. And the kind of primary partnership as part of this project is the Woods Valley Golf Club. They have the kind of general manager of the golf club who has a lot of interest. They recently had a transition where he just came on several months ago, I think closer to the beginning of the year, but he worked for a golf club before that had an Audubon certification. And so this was something he was already, trying to pursue for Woods Valley. And then he has a main facilities manager out there who is managing the landscape irrigation for the entire golf course and understands where the water's coming from, where it's getting piped to. And we definitely want to and need to leverage his experience. Beyond that too, we're also seeking to get input, kind of an external stakeholder is the water district. So they're getting some groundwater, they're using some reclaimed water, and they're getting some water from the water district, and that reclaimed water is actually from the water district, from the wastewater treatment plant as well, partnering them to get data, but also aligning with some of their goals. They're trying to have they're trying to recycle more water or recapture more of that water and have it put to good use. And so, they're a good partner, being very close proximity to the Woods Valley Golf Club.
Okay, well, the next slide, establish a next step, if you will, the establish study limits and scope. What are our objectives here? Here it's pretty straightforward. We want to use reduce our water use. I mean, especially here in Southern California, water use and water resources are scarce, and we want to basically, reducing water not only saves costs but improves our sustainability. I mean, if we're pulling away groundwater, sustainability would be achieved if we weren't depleting the groundwater table any further. So there's a metric for us to try to achieve, and a goal in general, because we won't be able to operate if we lose our source of water. So again, starting, what is our study scope and limits? Typically it's a facility or a group of facilities, as it has been in this case. I haven't been in touch with day to day the project that Josh and Scott have been working on here. So they can, hopefully Scott will be able to get back on and provide us some more details and examples of what they found in their P2 assessments. But
and Dan, I will too. I'll take Scott's, in terms of talking specifically about this project. I'll do that until Scott returns.
Okay.
And just, kind of considerations for study limits and scope are just, considering how far you want to or can go within a particular facility. So what facilities are you going to include, and then are you going to limit the aspects of the facility and its water use? Are you going to focus on both water and wastewater? Are you just going to focus on water usage? and what data do you actually have, and then what are you going to ultimately track? In terms of costs, in terms of the water usage, the wastewater generated, and beyond that, what are the pollution impacts that you want to track and report along the way? And these particular projects, I guess one limitation at Pala is that there's limited amount of tracking at some of the facilities. So there are meters at most of the facilities that are not necessarily being fully monitored, and then like the Pala Casino Spa and Resorts, that's a massive facility, and so having a single meter there and knowing what the water, what's going in and out of the facility doesn't really help a whole lot, because you really need to understand what's being used for various aspects of the operation, what's being used at the hotel, what's being used at the spa and the pool area, what's being used at the casino. And Shasta, I don't recall too, are there even separate kind of meters for the gas station and then the RV resort, or is it actually just one kind of line going into the full complex?
That I actually don't know, but I suspect that it's just one line going into the whole thing. There has not been, a big construction project to put in new pipe or anything like that. And, you brought up meters as well, and that's another one of those interesting issues where we have meters, but nobody is necessarily monitoring those meters, or our water department, our utilities department is, but they're a little bit leery for whatever reason of sharing that information with the environmental department. So that would have been something to mark on the poll, that there's kind of resistance because there's this sense that you're trying to take over our territory, which is not really the case, but it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and the other, can be a challenge with many tribes and many organizations is that, the Pala is, unlike San Pasqual Woods Valley Golf Club, where they're relying primarily on the water district for their water. Pala pumps all of its groundwater, so they're technically not paying for water, but they have a limited water resource between their groundwater basin and their groundwater recharge. And if that water basin is depleting over time, and that's going to become an issue and where they're going to have to likely get infrastructure added and start pumping water from outside sources in order to meet the need. So, in terms of the metrics that are being used, we can't really say, well, how much are we paying for water? So we have to be more creative in kind of communicating and tracking and explaining and helping people understand the impact and make it important to them as well. But, this is part of this is probably the next step is in terms of the teams and getting their buy-in from the initial start. So I'm going to do another poll. So just last poll, we just want to get a sense of people's areas of interest in water in particular with respect to pollution prevention. So I'm going to launch the poll with the assistance of our friendly goat.
Wait,
wow.
Try that one again.
Much better. We need to get the goat a megaphone.
I can just pretend to be the goat. Believe me, I have every reason to be screaming these days. I think we all do.
Yeah.
But at least Jessica's looks like you're in someplace nice and outside and pretty and green. And so I would say I envy you that. But over the weekend, my yard got up to 119 degrees. So yeah.
I'm in Sacramento and I'm on my patio, but it's not hot. Yes, yesterday was, roasting. So it's nice and mellow today.
That's good.
It's not going to reach 100.
That's good. Oh, we've got an other that was shared in comments for the pollution prevention topic that Ed Gonzalez is most interested in is fats, oils, and grease with the friendly acronym of FOG.
Good one.
It's almost as good as lust, leaking underground storage tank.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm in the poll right now and share the results. I see we have Scott back. Scott, I do recommend calling in. If you can, just that way if we lose you on video, we at least can maintain your audio.
Sure, let me try it. So I just hung back up actually, but let me do it again.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sorry. I apologize for that. I'm not sure. The internet went out in the whole house. My son came out because he's in class right now, and not sure what happened.
Wow.
A day in the life of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And then it magically came back right as I called in, and magically came back.
Oh, and actually, the poll, sorry, the results of the poll are wastewater management actually is the #1 result, followed by stormwater management. So not really what I was expecting. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And then 1 vote for fog.
Yeah. Well, and just to add into our list from the previous slide there on our list of goals and objectives, often it's a regulatory driver. There's often, hey, can we meet our regulatory objectives? A recent, if there was a new ad on the regulatory landscape, either local or federal, that's an objective as well, often, and more pressing objective typically than general water use and savings. Everybody's usually typically okay with that, but oftentimes it takes a regulation to really say, okay, we really got to go in this direction. What's the most cost-effective way to meet that regulation?
Good point, Dan. Thank you. All right, Scott, are you back on audio? We're still waiting for you.
Yep. You guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Great. So the next step, the first step in the data collection portion is to establish the status quo. What's going on currently? Where is your water coming from? Does it come from surface water, groundwater? Are you buying it from the municipal water district? Are you getting any reclaimed water? Are you, like Paula, are you producing any reclaimed water? And then you want to quantify your water use and your costs. What are you paying for all of that? Do you have water meters? You get that information from water meters, from going back through your water bills if you're buying water, or from facility knowledge. And we'll get into an example of that in a second here. And Dan put a good quote in here. You need to measure it to manage it. You need to know what you're using and how much you're paying for it in order to make management decisions. The next step is who are the major users? When you have something like a tribal organization and you have various businesses, various entities, who are your major users? So taking Paula as an example, their major users are Citrus Groves, Paula Casino, and then surprisingly we found out Fox Raceway. We weren't really expecting that to be a major water user, but they are. Other facilities that we looked at for the P2 project, the transfer station, the fleet services center, they're not really using a whole lot of water. So we're not really looking at them closely for the water portion of this. San Pasqual, they're big users, the golf course. That's fairly obvious, but that's their big water user there. So next slide, please, Josh.
And we'll just add the Fox Raceway was a big water user because it's a dirt track in a very arid area. You can imagine that dust is a major issue. So it's actually just spraying the track constantly, keep that dirt down.
Yeah, and the next slide, I think we're going to talk in depth about their water use. So when you're looking at these individual facilities, it is going to vary. And as Dan mentioned, sometimes getting this data is not very straightforward. It can be difficult. So just to kind of compare and contrast a couple of examples, Wood Valley Golf Course, they keep very detailed records. They have records as well as the San Pasqual tribe. They purchase their water from the local water district. They have groundwater wells that have metered wells. And so putting all that together and also from their user knowledge, they know that they use 380,000 gallons of water per day, which is a lot. But they know that number. They were able to provide that number pretty quickly. So that's how we got to their water use. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's Fox Raceway. Fox Raceway uses as Josh mentioned, they use their water to water down the dirt track for dust suppression and also just for track maintenance reasons. They have to do this. I'm not sure if they're doing it every day, but they have to do it every time the track is used. So essentially every day. They get their water from, I believe they have 3 wells on site. two of them they have to share, and then one is all theirs. But none of those wells are metered, so they don't really know directly how much water they're using. But when we went down there and talked to the staff down there, they told us that they have a 4,000 gallon water truck and a 2,000 gallon water truck, and they'll use one or the other to water the track down. If they're using their 4,000 gallon truck, it takes them 16 loads to water the track down. If they use their 2,000 gallon truck, it takes them 22 loads. Not exactly sure why there's a difference, but that's the information they had. So if we do the math, their water usage is 44,000 to 64,000 gallons a day. So that's how they came up with that. Their water usage is from their facility knowledge.
Scott, that's a really good point when we're trying to do a water balance. You know, basically with a water balance, how much is coming in, where's it going, and where does it go? What's its ultimate fate? You know, does it evaporate? Are we discharging it to a stream? You're not going to have enough data, all the data that you want, and you're going to have to make estimates like Scott did in this situation, where we make an educated guess and try to connect, you know, and make make our numbers balance as far as in and out. In equals out minus accumulation, basically. And you know, but getting the details on that, I know I worked at a auto manufacturing facility and tried to do a balance there, and you know, yeah, they didn't have a whole lot of meters either. They had one input, and like what process is using all their water. So it's you know, we'll have to fill in lack of data with engineering estimates, with just reasonable estimates, or if the data's just flat out gone, you know, what's a way to obtain the data? What's it worth to us? Is the data worthwhile getting? How much do we want to spend on collecting that data? You know, how many meters do we want to buy? It'd be ideal to have as many meters as we could, but you know, we have to make a reasonable you know, decision on how many can we get by with.
And if I had to guess, I would say the discrepancy between the 16 loads at 4,000 and 22 loads at 2,000 is that it's more of a time factor between them having to go and hook the truck back up, and they're probably just watering throughout the day, and just as a result, that, you know, the 22 loads, because it takes more time to rehook up and go get the water, they're probably just, you know, they have to spend they don't have as much time to water throughout the day that way. But it'd be interesting to go back and ask them about that and see if that explains it.
So the next step is to evaluate alternatives. What are your available water sources? Do you have additional groundwater sources or surface water sources? Is there possibility for storm or rainwater retention? Is it possible to treat the water on site like Pala has? And then and those are your, so obviously the first place to look would be on reservation within your facility. And then what resources are available outside? Would it be possible or better to purchase more municipal water, or could you purchase reclaimed water from the municipality? And then another thing too is and we'll get into this a little more later as well, of those sources, are those available for all your uses? So for example, Dan, could you talk to your example about, we were talking about the other day about the chillers?
Oh, well, yeah. It was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. You know, we did basically try to do a water balance on the whole base. They produced their own groundwater. They treated their own groundwater. Just happened to be very hard water, but because the Wright-Pat, for, you know, military purposes, they wanted to be self-sufficient, just like, you know, as Scott was indicating earlier, you know, some of the reservations would want to have that, you know, advantage or situation. So anyway, to make a long story short, the very hard water, and we did this water balance on the base and realized after adding up all the numbers and our best estimates that half of the water was used for cooling water, cooling towers, trying to keep the buildings cool during the summer. And the reason they were using so much water in the cooling towers was that it was rather hard water, and they couldn't get as many cycles as one would expect with a cooling tower. You'd want to get 2, 3, or 4 cycles out of that water before it evaporated, or you had to blow it down and discharge it. So with the cooling towers, we realized that, hey, if we just collected rainwater, it would be softer and better fitting that purpose, that specific purpose. The water chemistry was better for rainwater. People say, oh, the rainwater's dirty. Well, it's not. It's actually cleaner than the groundwater for the application that we're focusing on. So that's the water chemistry will come into play. But what are we using the water for? And matching those, matching up the our water needs to our water sources.
Sorry about that. So that kind of segues into our next slide is, are there restrictions in addition to that? Especially with groundwater, is it too saline to use for agriculture, or is there too many bicarbonates or some other chemical? I remember working on a groundwater project out in the Mojave Desert where we had to evaluate there was a contamination site, and we had to evaluate what the water quality of the ultimate sink where that groundwater was going. And it was so full of bicarbonates. It was, when you pulled it out, it looked like somebody shook up a soda. And so that water was really useless for any human or biological reason. So, those are other things to look at as far as the water quality. Another example is Woods Valley Golf Course gets a allocation of 43,000 gallons of reclaimed water that they purchase from the water district at a reduced rate, cheaper than potable water. As it turns out, though, that reclaimed water is not nutritionally beneficial to the golf course. So they can't really use more reclaimed water from the district to reduce their water. Just because
in their mind, I guess here's where I'm saying that we run up against there's going to be stakeholders in the whole process who will have a different opinion. Either they have I don't know if the point the guy's making is valid or not. I've never heard of the water being not nutritional enough. That was a new one on me when Scott told me about it, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm not an expert on agriculture or golf course maintenance. But what do you mean it doesn't have the nutritional value? I question that. But but that's where you need input from a lot of different folks.
And then lastly, what's the future outlook for these sources? An example is Woods Valley Golf Course. They do have one really productive water well that they use, but it's located on a vacant lot adjacent to their property. And there's plans to build a grocery store on top of it. So it's possible they're going to lose that groundwater well as one of their sources in the near future. Another example would be at Pala, speaking with Shasta's water manager, who's very, very good at what she does. They have issues with, so right now they, as we discussed, have their main water source is groundwater, but there is a new law in California that may potentially impact their ability to use it. And Shasta, if you would, could you comment a little bit on what the story with that is?
The story on the water availability?
On SGMA.
Yeah, so of course the SGMA is the state Groundwater Management Act, and it's caused issues because, number one, the tribes aren't bound by SGMA, but in Paula's case, we're surrounded by water users who rely on groundwater, and not just residential, but primarily agricultural, citrus groves, avocado groves, and plant nurseries. So the tribes in our area have gotten involved with discussions over the Groundwater Management Act, and the reason is that what happens upstream affects what happens downstream. So the more people are taking water from the upper parts of the watershed, the less that we have available in our groundwater system. And Of course, over the years, as use has increased, we see that the groundwater is not being recharged to make up for each year's usage. So the water table is dropping each year. And that's clearly an enormous concern for us and leads into looking for ways to leverage some of our reclaimed water and just finding ways to better manage our water, because our concerns are for our residents and our economic development. So yeah, it's a big problem.
Thank you, Shasta. So that's a really good example of, you know, when you're looking for these opportunities, don't just look at what's happening now. You got to look at what's coming down the road. So you go to the next slide, Josh, please. So we just wanted to just go over just kind of some very general areas to start looking at water conservation opportunities. So the first strategy would be to reduce demand. Use water smarter, use less of it, buy less of it. Another strategy along those lines would be to diversify your sources. It seems that both Pala and San Pasqual use some mix of municipal water, groundwater, and reclaimed water. Can there be savings by adjusting that mix or looking at different sources? And then lastly, and this is more of a waste reduction and also pollution prevention measures, reduce what's flowing out. Can you do water reclamation or recycling? Can you do stormwater retention and capture, rainwater retention? Are those possibilities, and can those be useful? The next step would be to look at areas of increasing water efficiency. And this sometimes this is an infrastructure issue where you want to look at, you know, do you have leaks, loss? Does the infrastructure need to be improved or repaired? Or it could also be more of an administrative thing. If you have agriculture, can you, enterprises, can you adjust the time that you water where it's cooler or less windy, or not water in windy conditions? So sometimes it's an administrative practice that can result in some savings and some reduction of waste. Next slide, please.
And Scott, on that one too, if you flip it on its head, I mean, if you're in I know we're talking about arid environments here, but in other parts of the country, again, back east, where I'm from, you know, one of the infrastructures things for leaks and loss is infiltration into our wastewater systems, into our sewers and whatnot. So we get groundwater, there's so much groundwater, it leaks into our sewers, and then it goes to our treatment plant and overtaxes the treatment plant and costs money to treat water that's basically clean. And so again, keeping your pipes in good shape is, you know, a long-term investment.
That's great, Dan. Thanks. Dan, could you take the next slide?
Sure. I guess, you know, there's you know, on the gamut of water conservation opportunities, P2 opportunities for water. You know, they go from low flow toilets and faucets all the way to, like you said, leak detection and a program for your piping to try, you know, to save water that way. The FEMP manual, the Federal Energy Management Program. Now, they have this for decades. They've been pushing the idea of water conservation and energy as part of energy conservation, because you have to think about it. One of the big costs with water, if you're not paying a bill like you are at your residence, even if you're just pumping it from the ground, conserving water conserves energy, and conserving energy is, you know, leads to less greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. So connecting the idea that by conserving energy, we're also by conserving water, we're conserving energy. We don't have to pump it as far. We don't have to have, well, you know, pumps going day and night, pumping, you know, ungodly distances of water day and night. I mean, that's how most cities operate. But so every gallon of water we reduce somewhat the energy cost of moving that water around. So the FEMP manual is mostly about energy management. I think that's going to be the subject for another seminar here. But you know, they have a plethora of best management practices for water efficiency as well. And I think if you tool around the website there for the FEMP folks, you'll see that you'll see a lot of experience from decades of implementation.
That's great.
Before
And
moving
note
on
the
to the
shameless
next
plug
slide, I'll
for
just.
Yes, Josh.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just saying, note the shameless plug for next week's webinar topic with Josh, energy.
Yep. And then, just I think one thing we want to reiterate that we brought up in the prior two webinars is that, you don't want to like come up with all ideas right now, create an entire list. Don't allow yourself to automatically dismiss ideas due to preconceived notions. So one example, which may or may not be valid, is the ability to use the reclaimed water at Woods Valley Golf Course, so using more of it because it doesn't have as much nutrient value for what they're watering there. Kind of put everything up there as you can and run, then at kind of for the next step, what we're going to transition to is then running that kind of initial evaluation to then triage things. But I think it's always best at this stage. It is always best at this stage to any possible idea, put it up there and ensure that you do some level of analysis of it before dismissing it.
And get a lot of good ideas from others in your same situation. Golf courses should, I'm sure they have a society there that they can connect to about water conservation on golf courses. And that's where, we get a lot of our good ideas. It's like, hey, they're doing this over here at this military base. Why can't we do it at that military base?
And a literature review tends to be part of these processes as well. Going to other facilities, going to other studies and plans that are just available on the internet and reviewing what are their best management practices as well. Looking at going to resources online like WaterSense and others where you can just kind of review resources, opportunities, best management practices, case studies. Just get those ideas that, you just may come across something you didn't even think of that could be valid and legitimate. Talking with other people and their experiences too. Sometimes, you see something that looks like it has some validity, but you don't really understand it. If you can reach out to that organization, the people worked on it there, they'll be able to share a bit more information and some insights that you won't be able to glean just from reviewing the literature available online.
Yeah, exactly. And just as a case in point, at the beginning of this project, another member of our team, when we started looking at Woods Valley Golf Course, immediately started looking up what golf courses out in the desert do to save water, to see if there's anything we can apply to that. So that's another example of that. And speaking of Woods Valley Golf Course, just as an example of one of the P2 opportunities that were identified that we're going to be looking into, at the golf course, there are 5 ponds on the golf course that double as water hazards for golf course play and also as water storage for irrigation. All of those ponds are linked by pipes, and they can pump water back and forth between them, except for 2 of them. They're linked by this unlined channel that's shown in the picture. And so one of the things we're going to look at is if there's any water loss in this channel while the water's slowing down it, and would they have sufficient savings if they were to either line the channel or put a pipe in between the 2 of them. So that's one example of a potential P2 opportunity that we've identified. Go to the next slide, please, Josh. And then another example at Woods Valley is, so this is an overhead of the golf course. And if you can look kind of towards the bottom of the map, there's kind of a long, skinny pond right beneath Medina Way there. That's pond 10. And what happens is at the very bottom of the map is Woods Valley Road. In the wet season, when it rains, all of the onflow for the whole golf course comes from Woods Valley Road, and it ends up in pond 10. Pond 10 then overflows. They have to pump it to the next pond, which then overflows. They have to pump it to the next pond, the next pond, the next pond. When the last pond overflows, they just have to pump the water out into the hillside. So one opportunity that we're going to look at is there a potential to capture any of that stormwater, retain any of that stormwater for future irrigation use? We don't know. It may involve putting some sort of large cistern or something in the ground at the golf course. That might not be a possibility. So but that's definitely on our list, though.
Well, it's a possibility. Just how much does it cost?
Yeah, exactly.
We landed a guy on the moon. We can do it. It's a matter of how much does it cost.
Yeah, exactly. And that may not end up being one of the ones that we recommend that they go forward with, but that's on our list at this point. Another great place to start is to look at what has previously been done. Have you had any water conservation efforts in the past? Where were they implemented? Were they effective or not? Point is, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. Some examples are at Pala. They have their, like we mentioned, their wastewater treatment plant. That's a tertiary treatment system that recycles water. So that was just the existence of that plant as a starting point for us to develop other P2 opportunities. Can we use more reclaimed water in the groves? Can we use it for irrigation at the casino? So that's another, can the Fox Raceway use any of that reclaimed water for their watering needs instead of their well water? So that was just a good starting point, just that plant existed. Another example is back in 2015, the Woods Valley Golf Course did a drought study that recommended turf replacement to reduce the amount of irrigated land on the golf course. But none of it was ever implemented. So that's another really good starting point. Next slide, please. So just some possibilities that opportunities could focus on is improving existing conservation efforts or expanding existing conservation efforts that, like we just talked about. Landscape design. If new buildings are, that's more of a new buildings, new construction kind of thing. Can it be designed more with lower water using and drought friendly landscaping, water wise landscaping? Is there anything anywhere for replacement of landscaping or turf with more drought or synthetic possibilities or xeriscaping? Another possibility too that I think gets overlooked is, and I think this would be important to tribal organizations too, is replacing with native plants. Landscaping is full of, plants that look pretty, but they're not from around here. People put them in because they look nice. If an effort, native plants evolved in that location, they use the right amount of water. So that's another possibility for lowering water demand is using native plants. As we discussed before, administrative best practices, in improving your leak detection and repair procedures, changing irrigation schedules, crop selection. I was just heard recently about a big controversy up in the Central Valley of California with a certain watershed, and this kind of got into water rights and stuff. But there's a lot of large agriculture, big business agriculture up there that are growing almonds, and almonds use, I forget what the number is, but an insane amount of gallons per almond is used in the Central Valley, and this is an area where water demand is a big issue. So could better crops be selected, more water efficient crops for the climate or the landscape? Stormwater and rainwater management, again, can those be improved? Can those be implemented? Replacing with fixtures with low flow fixtures. And as Dan had already discussed, cooling tower management could potentially be a big issue, a big savings area. And then lastly, is there availability for reclaimed or recycled water, and can those be used?
Scott, I just want to jump in here with an example from, so I was the environmental director for the San Ynez Chumash located up in Santa Barbara County, California, before starting Prosper Sustainably. And while I was there, we managed the landscaping around the tribal government building and tribal health clinic. So what before we started there, the landscape was managed by an outside company, and we just saw some opportunities to internalize that, but also to reconsider the plants that are being used. And again, it was kind of a lot of non-natives, ones that looked or more aesthetically pleasing, but used more water. We ended up integrating not just native plants, but plants of cultural significance as well. So integrating junkus for basket weaving, integrating sage, which is for ceremonial use, not just as a not just for the actual use of the plant, which had some limited value, had some value, but also as an educational tool. So having markers there that have the common name, the scientific name, and then the Chumash Samala name for that particular plant as well. And it just, it creates more excitement, enthusiastic. You look at edibles and other ways to make your landscape more functional, create education and awareness where people can actually, and then create, tools and educational material and literature where people can integrate the same concepts at their homes as well. And then the Chumash too, they have a wastewater treatment plant, and they were pumping the reclaimed water back into the casino, into toilets, and for their landscape irrigation as well.
So the next step is, once you've identified your possible opportunities, to start doing analysis to whittle those down into the opportunities that you may want to implement. So the first and biggest analysis is your cost analysis. How much is it going to cost upfront to install or implement this? What is it going to cost to operate that over time? And then what are your expected savings, and over what time period are you expecting to see those savings? The next thing is this actually feasible to build and implement? Is there any grants or credits or rebates for doing this, such as at Woods Valley Golf Course, there's a rebate, California rebate for their turf replacement. If they were to do that, they get a rebate of $3 a square foot to offset their costs. So that's important to be aware of. Will you have management or stakeholder buy-in? If it's, for example, like an administrative practice, so the people at the facility can actually do this, that's a big question. Another one would be, what are the impacts if it's a construction project? What are the impacts of that going to be? Do you have to, tear up the golf course or shut down the casino or something like that? Are those impacts going to be worth what you're going to get out of implementing that P2 opportunity? And Shasta, are you aware of any grants or water savings grants or rebates or anything that Pala's pursued?
We haven't actually done too much on that, other than what we can with our typical EPA grants for water. There are a few opportunities here and there for infrastructure. For example, being able to extend purple pipe from our wastewater treatment plant to some of our facilities to use them for irrigation purposes. And then, like you've been saying all along, it really depends on each community's individual situation. Our situation is challenged by the fact that our roads are county and state highways and not necessarily reservation roads that we would have to put these pipes through. So we do have to deal with permitting from county jurisdictions, state jurisdictions, but there's a lot of different ways to use different grants to include water and water issues, since it's an overall part of environmental protection for tribes in general. Right at the top of my head right now, I don't know of any opportunities for water. Josh may have run across a few.
Yeah, I would say, a bit of a list of things to consider for water that are either available right now or are available in the future. If you are getting water from a local water district, they tend to have rebates available, maybe linked to that WaterWise website. They may not be, but for installing new measures, installing new appliances. Scott mentioned the state can have landscaping related rebates. If you're a tribe, you have GAP grant funding, you may be able to use some of that for some measures, possibly not, certainly for planning activities. Clean Water Act 319, both the base grant and competitive grants. While the focus tends to be on stormwater, there certainly are stormwater related opportunities that you may be able to get funding for implementation for Bureau of Reclamation for the tribes in the western side of the United States, for wastewater treatment plants, for just extending water facilities and resources. There's a variety of funding sources available you want to keep your eyes on. Some tied to energy. They have a regular recurring energy and water funding opportunity that you should keep your eyes on. And Also, USDA, both loans and grants. And I feel like I had another one in there, but those opportunities out there, just try to be creative with it as well. FEMA right now has some funding opportunities for flood mitigation, and that try to be creative, try to integrate some of the water reclamation activities or capture some of that stormwater for use while addressing some of the flood related hazards that your community is facing as well. And certainly Pala and San Pasqual, but mainly Pala, we're doing a study on flood mitigation right now, and I think we'll see what we can do to capture some of that rainwater and put it to good use when they get inundated, quite literally, during the storms.
Let me also mention that we have a couple of Bureau of Reclamation grants. For some reason, those slipped my mind. But those are a really great opportunity too. We're using one to install smart water meters on our houses. And then we have another that we are using for soil moisture monitoring in our groves. So BOR grants, writing them can be a little technical. So we engaged a consultant to help with that, but that's what made us successful.
IHS maybe too, particularly for wastewater. But anyways, get creative, look at all those opportunities. There's lots of tribal specific funding that you may be able to apply for some of these opportunities.
Okay, so the next step is to select opportunities to implement. Dan, could you go ahead and take this slide and talk to this a little bit?
Well, sure. Basically, again, you want the opportunities you identify, the simplest ones. The old expression in the P2 business is, start with the low-hanging fruit. Everybody says, oh, we've already picked it. Well, maybe not, I don't know. Use established conservation technologies. Low flow, nobody uses a 5-gallon flush toilet anymore. Can't even buy them. Using established conservation technologies, retrofitting fixtures as, the end of the useful life of the old fixtures comes into playing, those are the types of low-hanging fruit, established technologies that you want to hit first, the biggest payback. And, the projects with the shortest payback period, you'll have no problem rationalizing a project if you show a payback period that's some reasonable, less than 10 years. It's not like any of these organizations are going to go away. That's what I say in our military clients. It's like, are you going to go somewhere? Is 20 years not enough of a payback period? I don't know. I think we'd rather have less than a 5-year payback period typically, but we're not a for-profit company in our military installation. So it's like, look, we're going to be here for the long haul. So how long of a payback period do we need to satisfy, our financial folks? And then, the cost benefit analysis is very kind of, sometimes myopic. It's very, looks at the very depleted level of what we're proposing to do with the opportunity. But, sometimes you have to look a little bit, longer term, depleting the water resources. It's one thing to say, well, it's going to cost us, it'll take 30 years for this project to pay back. Well, if we don't have our water resources, where are we left then? You might not be able to put a number on that in the cost analysis, but, it's an overriding factor. So, again, long-term sustainability, taking that into consideration in terms of both, water use and energy use.
Which I think is particularly relevant to tribes. A lot of times we're talking about trust plans or reservations that are, they're not going to be selling those lands. They're not going to be selling those businesses. So the payback considerations are going to be different or should be different, as well as we already talked about with Pala, they have limited groundwater resources available to them that need to be managed over the long haul. And there can be cultural considerations with the resources, water resources and other resources and are part of this equation as well. So certainly, you want to get kind of some broad stakeholder buy-in and feedback on the types of considerations and values that should be incorporated into this evaluation, not just the cost benefit, not just the direct pollution related impacts or the direct water use, but go beyond that.
Yeah, and especially, I guess one other thing just to throw in there as well, getting back to that slide, with the low-hanging fruit, again, put it into the design, and if you're building a new building, implement the P2 and water conservation, make that one of the priorities in the design of the new project or new building. I think that's the most economical way to do it. It's rather than trying to retrofit some facility, if it was built, using the LEED, principles and trying to meet those guidelines for LEED construction, then the cost benefit, won't really be a factor. It'll be just up front. You'll I don't know. I'm babbling there, but
which I mean, it's go ahead.
I was going to say that's a great segue for, I think that's going to come up quite a bit in the roundtable on Thursday, actually.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, it can be challenging when you're doing new construction because if you have an existing building, you have a current pain associated with the current cost, and so showing the differences between the two can be a bit easier. So you just have to be careful when it tends to be way less costly up front. The capital costs are less. I don't know what's going on with these slides going back and forth, but the capital cost tends to be less when you're if you implement it from the get-go with a new building, new construction. So you kind of also need to not only project what the water usage would be if you implemented the business as usual measure versus the kind of LEED type measure or the water saving measure, but you also have to show, well, what's it going to cost to retrofit this building in the future rather than installing it right now. And you tend to get, I think, a pretty significant cost difference between the both of those that you got to ensure you communicate well at a time where it's already a costly investment and people are probably resistant to increasing the overall cost of a new construction project.
So the next step is presenting what you found and documenting it. So once you've identified the opportunities that you want to implement, then it's time to present that to the stakeholders. So whether that in a tribal situation, whether that would be the tribal administration, whether that would be the tribal members, it would vary from instance to instance. But when you present that, you're going to want to have developed a funding plan. How are you going to pay for the upfront costs? Is it going to be a grant? Is it, whatever the situation is? How is it going to be implemented or constructed? And then that would also be the time to show what the cost savings are expected to be and what the overall benefits of implementing that would be. The next slide, please. And then lastly, and this is a very important step, is to document what you found. Whether that's a formal report or whatever the case is, it's important to document what you found. We see this a lot with our other clients. Let's say, for example, Shasta wins the lottery tomorrow, and she says, "See you guys later. I bought an island in Fiji." All that institutional knowledge that she has been at the forefront of this P2 initiative. She has a lot of institutional, not a lot, she has a ton of institutional knowledge. All that would go with her if you didn't write this down. So you want to document do a summary of the data you found so somebody doesn't have to go back and do that again. Give the whole list of all the opportunities that you identified, even if you didn't end up implementing them. Why you selected, the rationale of why you selected what you did select, and then your cost analysis. And as I said, design it to be a turnover document. When Shasta wins the lottery, she can give it to her successor and say, "Here you go. This is the P2 study that we did in 2020. I'll see you in Fiji."
I think it's more likely that I'll get hit by a cement truck, and I tend to go more for the less, optimistic versions of how my institutional knowledge will disappear. But thanks.
I was trying to flip the narrative, Shasta, but we do see this with our military clients a lot. Well, there'll be somebody that's been in a position at a base and they've been there for forever and they're highly motivated and they've spearheaded all these programs, and then they retire or they get transferred to another installation or something, and all of that institutional knowledge goes with them, and then whoever takes over for them starts from scratch. And a lot of times they're not as motivated as the person that they're succeeding, and all of that work goes poof. Okay.
And, you know, we encountered some turnover with the midstream on this project with the San Pasqual band at the Woods Valley Golf Club. They had a facilities manager there who was very knowledgeable and seemed very motivated to proceed with this analysis and these opportunities. And then I know we learned beginning of last year that he had left and new people had came. And, you know, I was frankly worried that we were going to lose a ton of momentum. And I think in this case, which I think it tends to be rare, we were lucky and we had some people who had as much knowledge and even more motivation. You know, he brought in a new facilities manager with a lot of knowledge. Certainly he didn't have as much institutional knowledge about the site and the facility, although I was very impressed with the amount that they had just, you know, in a very short period of time. And then he came with him a new GM who came from a golf course with an Autobahn certification already, a lot of knowledge around these types of measures and a lot of motivation to proceed. So that's kind of rare. I would not count on that being the case. Usually, you know, these changes happen. I think, you know, may or may not have been related to COVID, but sometimes it's a cost-cutting measure, and you bring in people that are, you know, people who are making as much money and are, you know, possibly not even, you know, aren't willing to consider the environmental impacts and benefits to these projects as much as just the bottom line costs.
So then the last step of the P2 process, and unfortunately it starts the whole thing all over again, is to follow up and reassess. And you want to establish at the outset, how often are you going to follow up? Every year, every 5 years? How often are you going to review what you found? How much you use, and then what metrics are you going to use to measure your progress? Are you going to measure cost savings, water use? There's a few options, and you just have to decide on what those are going to be. But you need to evaluate what has worked and what doesn't. Maybe you came up with this great idea and implemented it and doesn't work. One example I see a lot is, especially maybe, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, there was a big push to replace like wash rack systems for vehicles with a closed loop system. Well, a lot of the early models don't work very well. And so they've been disconnected. They're still there, but they've been disconnected. And they just use the regular water. So it's important to go back and reassess what has worked and what doesn't, and start the process over. This is supposed to be a living process, so there's not really an end point. Lessons learned: think outside the box, be creative, and then it might not always be an obvious possibility or opportunity. The next one, and we've hounded on this the last couple of webinars, is management support and engagement is critical. We see a lot of times where the facility level people and the shop level people get really excited about a P2 opportunity that has been selected to be implemented, but their upper management could care less. They don't really give them the support. Maybe they give them some funding, maybe not. But the point is that opportunity just kind of ends up fizzling out. And speaking of shop employees, they should be engaged throughout the process. A lot of times there tends to be a temptation to just have this be kind of a management level exercise. You know, the environmental staff will do this. The tribal administration is going to do this. No, we need to get the facility and shop level people involved. And as Josh was mentioning, Woods Valley is a great example of this. The guys that came in and they're new, but they came with a lot of experience with sustainability and implementing these things. They're so much closer to the problems than we could ever be. And so they came up with several ideas themselves just in talking with them for ways for both P2 and hazardous substance sustainability. So it's really important to have those types of people, the people that know the facility, to be engaged throughout the process. And then lastly is plan for contingencies. And since we're talking about water, I mean, in the Western United States, drought is huge. And with global warming and climate change, that's only going to get worse. So factoring that into and that also goes back to not just looking at what the present conditions are, look at what's coming down the road is crucial. And then some challenges that we've seen. Funding is always the challenging, or lack of funding is always a challenge, or where the funding comes from and what it could be spent on. Stakeholder mindset, this goes back to lack of management engagement, or even shop level. The employees just don't want to do it. That can be challenges. Management administrators report, we already mentioned. Also basing opportunity decisions on cost alone. Going back to what Dan said with sustainability, looking at making a decision that we don't want to do this project because it costs too much, or the turnarounds on the investment is too long. Well, what if in 10 years you don't have that resource anymore? What value do you put on that? So those are some challenges that we've seen with our clients implementing these. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, not specifically, but yeah, I mean, it's just there's in my experience, there's folks who are going to put up barriers to the opportunity, and some barriers are, it's easy to say no. I think we've all been through that, and it's hard to get a yes out of people, and you got to figure out which barriers are real, which barriers are not, and which barriers can be surmounted, and which ones can't. So I guess just like with anything, but we have a lot of stakeholders involved with all this typically, but usually one of them will try to say no for some reason. But that's not insurmountable, basically.
So I think that's it. And I'm going to turn it back over to Josh for any questions or any discussion.
Yeah, we amazingly allowed almost 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I encourage you to you can raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask questions. You can type some in the box. I'm going to answer one question that isn't water specific, but is specific to kind of the P2 planning process in general. I think the person who asked the question left, but we will answer it anyways. And his question was, because of COVID-19, are you preparing to conduct site visits virtually? And we're in general, we attempt to do that as much as possible to reduce the amount of burden on people on site. But it's we gather as much as we can remotely, through pictures, but it still is important to get on site at least once, particularly if you're using if you're hiring an outside firm who doesn't have any specific site knowledge, to be able to see things in person, to have the conversations with facilities managers. And, in this case, I would have probably joined some of the site visits that Scott and his team did on hazardous substances and water. But I chose not to because of COVID, and they're doing social distancing and wearing masks and doing all those protocols as well. It makes it a little bit more challenging, but I think fortunate enough that most of these facilities are actually outdoors as well. It's just a matter of these challenges are always, regardless of COVID or not, getting people enough attention and time from the people who are managing these businesses, managing the facilities. It's something you need to balance, and you don't want to also ask too much either. They make their jobs as easy as possible, make it easy as possible for them to give the information, to provide their input, whether you're a consultant or whether you're a government staff member or a support team member on this project. I don't see any other questions.
I'll contribute a little bit to the last question. Health and safety is obviously paramount in either your opportunities or your consultants' operations or anything like that. That said, a site visit can really be invaluable, so you can see what the processes are. So if it can be done safely, I would recommend it. But take all the precautions you can. For example, we waited until Pala Casino opened back up to the public before we did our site visit there. We followed all of their health and safety preventions for COVID while we were there. Everything else was outside. We social distanced, all those kinds of things. But a site visit it can be really important.
Yeah, before I turn it over to Shasta to wrap up, because I don't see any additional questions, just as a reminder, going back to the very beginning, this series continues. We'll be focusing again on water, landscaping in particular, in the roundtable discussion on Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific. And then energy is the focus next week on Tuesday and Thursday, with the final webinar on the following Tuesday. So I please encourage you to share this information with others that may be interested. Point them to our website so they can review the prior recordings, share the registration for the future upcoming events, and we really appreciate your participation today. Shasta?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thank you again to everybody who is here listening and learning, and to our terrific panelists in spite of the little technical glitches here and there. I always learn a lot from being a part of these things, even though I'm technically the lead of the whole project. So that's why it's so great to have these opportunities to bring in the experts and have them do the work instead. But again, we're really glad you could all join us, and look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott and Dan and Shasta, Jessica, and everybody, Michael as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, stay safe.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.